Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled are actress, author Adrienne Barbeau, and author Michael Michaud. Actress, author, dancer, singer, mother of twins, was born and raised in Northern California. She attended Foothill College and made her Broadway debut in Fiddler on the Roof. A big break for Adrienne, who was working as a go-go dancer. She went on to be nominated for a Tony in Grease, creating the role of Rizzo, which led to a long life as B. Arthur's daughter in Maude. So on film, we know her as the Scream Queen for The Fog, Swamp Thing, and Creepshow, all those movies that you like to watch late at night. So who better to write a vampire book about vampires of Hollywood, followed by love bites, than you?
Well, my lead vampire is a Scream Queen, so they say write what you know.
Yes, how did the perky Rizzo get to that? Get to be where you are, the Scream Queen?
The first feature I ever did back in 1978, in the days when if you were starring on a television series, no one would see you for films.
That's right.
Was The Fog. And it was more of a fantasy, but a scary film. It was directed by a man named John Carpenter, who I eventually married. And so I think the combination of that being my first film and my relationship with John, who was known for horror, sort of planted that thought in people's mind. And then I got started. That's what they started calling me for.
You know, that never dawned on me. That's Cody's father.
Yes, Cody Carpenter. Yes.
Oh, and he did make all of those genre films.
He did. He still is.
I don't know what happened. I don't know how that disconnected with me, but now I see. So, what does Scream Queen really mean?
Well,
are you always screaming?
In my case, most of the characters I played were not screaming. They were fighting back, you know.
Yeah.
They were killing Isaac Hayes or trying to, or but basically a Scream Queen is the star of your basic horror film.
Well, let's go back to go-go dancer. I don't think anyone knows what a go-go dancer is.
Well, when I started doing it, they sure didn't.
They didn't know then?
No,
so they were just
we were the first
labeling
ones.
Ah.
You know, when I first moved to New York to be an actress on Broadway, I needed to work at night because I needed my days free so I could audition and take classes and voice lessons and all of that. And so I started working as a cocktail waitress in a nightclub in Midtown Manhattan. And the fellow who owned the club had a stage. And on the stage, he had motorized mannequins who were dressed up like musicians. They, you know, the drummer sort of did this, and the guitar player did this, and he played records over a loudspeaker. Yeah, full size.
Wow.
Well, people would look in from outside. This is one of the stories I tell in There Are Worse Things I Could Do.
There
my
are
memoir,
worse things
I could do.
That's your
from the song
memoir.
that I sang on Broadway as the original Rizzo.
Okay,
That's-
okay, great. So
Rizzo
we'll tie
sings
it all
that, yeah.
in, yeah, because I wondered where the memoir came in and how the stories came up, and
Yeah.
all right, we pulled it all together. So,
Well, people would look in from outside and think there was a live band and come in and pay their money for their, $1 for a Budweiser in 1968, I guess it was, 66. And then they'd turn around and there were these dummies on stage. And we were having a lot of angry customers.
That is so great.
So the boss said, look, why don't you girls get up and dance to the music? And I later learned from a woman who wrote a book about that place and those people. I was basically working for the mob. That we were
really?
probably the first discotheque dancers in existence. I don't know if it's true.
That's funny. You know. But so the mob didn't come in and go, dance, dance.
Yes, they were the ones. Well, they owned the place. You know.
Oh, they went dance.
Yes,
They didn't say take
yes.
off your clothes, though.
No. This was once it went topless, I was gone. I was long gone. We were wearing boots up to here and leotards and high necks.
But now we know go.
Maybe so. Maybe that came from Maddie's Mardi Gras in Midtown Manhattan.
That's very funny. But so here we have Love Bites, we have the vampires, we have the Scream Queen. Can we call those things cult genre or horror films or like?
Well, Love Bites and Vampires of Hollywood are your basic vampire comedy thrillers, I think.
But they're not. They wouldn't be like the films. Like can we call the films cult films that you were in?
Horror film. Many of them have become cult films. They've achieved cult status, like Escape from New York, which is a, huge success even to this day.
And Rob Zombie, you worked with.
Rob Zombie, I did Rob Zombie's Halloween. I am not in the film if you don't look at the director's cut, because. I just went in and did a cameo for him, and he called the night that the movie was premiering and said, "Adrienne, I'm sorry I was long on the movie, and you're not going to see yourself, but it's in the special material on the DVD."
But it's all part of that whole thing.
Yes.
That whole thing. So by your being around it so much, and I guess it was pretty formula based. Is that how you started to write these books?
No, actually.
Because there's
I wrote my memoir first. There are worse things I could do, and
how does that song go?
There are worse things I could do. Second act.
Rock
Rizzo.
and roll. Right. Okay, got it. So the
long story is I lost a very close friend to cancer back in 1998. And I met this woman on the first day of preschool for my older son, Cody. And we were the best of friends. And her loss really left a huge hole in my life. And 3 years after she passed, on the first day of preschool for my two younger boys, a woman walked onto the campus who looked just like my deceased friend. Oh. And she looked so much like her that I sort of blanched, and she reached out her hand. She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. You just look like someone I know." She said, "Who?" I said, "Oh, you wouldn't know her. She was my closest friend. She was a film editor, and she died of breast cancer." And this woman, who looked just like my friend, said, "Oh, well, I'm a film editor, and I have breast cancer.
No.
We could be best friends."
Oh my gosh.
And it was such a bizarre conversation that I immediately said, "What are you doing? Let's go out and have coffee."
Right.
And so we did. And in the course of the coffee, she told me about a writing class that she had attended. And as soon as I heard her talking about this, I had never thought about writing before.
Oh, you hadn't?
Never. I didn't even know people taught writing in a class unless, they were teaching how to spell the words or make the paragraphs.
You were too busy.
Yeah,
working.
I was acting. But as soon as this woman said this, I thought, I have to go and take that class. And so I've always felt everything that came as a result of taking that writing class was my deceased girlfriend sending me a message.
Sending you the help.
Yeah. So I started taking a writing class and learned very quickly that if you're going to write, you've got to bring in homework assignments. And I started out just writing some little short pieces about things that had happened to me that I thought somebody else might find funny. Dating Burt Reynolds, or doing the low-budget horror movie in Moscow when I landed on the night of an attempted coup and they declared martial law, and I didn't know if I was going to get home. And then I was supposed to be working with 50 trained rats, and of course I got on the set and there were only 16 rats that were alive, and all they were trained to do was eat anything that had smelled like fish. And so they used to take fish heads and squeeze the juice all over my costume
so
when they wanted the rats on me. So I wrote little pieces like that.
Those were very interesting, though, because you write what you know, right?
I wrote what I know. After about 6 months of bringing in these homework assignments, the teacher said, you should look for an agent because I think you've got a book here. And I did, and that was There Are Worse Things I Could Do.
Oh, that came from that. Okay,
Right.
Now let's start with Vampires of Hollywood because that comes next.
When this one came out, this fellow, Michael Scott, who at the time was a very successful author in Ireland and in the UK, and had a background in sales and marketing.
Oh,
he had
knew what
run
to do.
a bookstore. He approached me and he said, I think you wrote the wrong book. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I think you should write a horror novel for your horror genre fan base. All the guys and girls who still watch The Fog,
that's
or
what I
Creep
mean,
Show,
'cause
or
it's-
Swamp Thing, or all of those. I have done other films.
Right. No, there's a long
those
list.
are the ones that people remember. And so I said, well, I think I could. I mean, I can certainly write the dialogue and the characters, but I mean, I've only written a memoir, and I knew how that was going to come out, and I'm not so sure about plot. And he said, I'll help you.
He was a brilliant marketer,
He
right?
was a
Because he
brilliant
knew
marketer.
that he had all those people out there who would read your book.
Right. So
And
we
they
sat
did.
down and we created Avsana Moore, who is a
She
screen
starts
queen.
there.
She is the head of a small film studio making low-budget horror
I
films.
see.
And she's also a 450-year-old Armenian vampire.
So she starts in Vampires
She starts
of
in
Hollywood.
Vampires of Hollywood.
I
Love
see.
Bites is a standalone sequel. It can be read. You
That's
don't
what
have
I
to
read
have
it
read
and I didn't
yeah,
realize.
You didn't.
Oh.
You don't have to have read
Yes,
Vampires
so
of Hollywood.
she's an
but
Armenian.
Well, they say write what you know. I know Armenian. My mom is Armenian, and I was raised in the Armenian culture.
And so was I.
And so were you, and that's why I'm here.
And that's why I love it, because you talk about Arat, you talk about Armenian restaurants in Glendale.
yes.
You talk about Venice and Lord Byron.
Yes.
Who learned to speak
was,
Armenian.
Yes, he was a big Armenian aficionado. But I mean, it's basically, it's Avsana is sort of trying to get together with the detective that she met in Vampires of Hollywood.
I see.
And they're being threatened by werewolves. There's a jealous assistant.
That's what's so great, because it's so Hollywood. It's every bit Hollywood, and then you say it has this Armenian vampire, but she's just an interesting person.
She is. I think she is.
She's
well,
like got strength.
Her father, her father actually, although she's 450 years old, so I'd have to sit and do the math how old he was.
Right.
But he was a Dakhanavar vampire living in the mountains around Mount Ararat.
Had you ever heard about vampires in Armenia? Did you just make this up?
No, when time came for Michael and I wrote this one together, and then when time came for me to write the sequel by myself, I mean, I was pulling out vampire encyclopedias, werewolf encyclopedias, and there's this Armenian vampire.
And that's how she came about. But I loved it when she does this party and she dances, and all the music is very Armenian in a restaurant, and you're serving yalanchi and what else? Lamajun and kufta
and
suburag.
Yes.
All the things.
And then the owner of the restaurant comes along and he wants everybody to drink some rahi. And of course she's a vampire. She doesn't eat. She drinks, but not, only blood. And so she's got to hide the rahi. And
so did you know about all that food and all of that from your mother?
Oh, yes.
Your grandmother?
Yeah, my grandmother, my mother, my aunt. I have people ask me, why do you think you ended up playing such strong characters or writing such strong characters? And I always say, I think it's because of my Armenian heritage, We come from a long line of women who survived.
Yeah, and really strong, not afraid to work.
Right. I have a 95-year-old aunt who is still driving, cooking Thanksgiving dinner for 40 of us, you know, I mean.
Yeah,
It was a big influence.
I
in my
raise a
life.
glass to that because
I
I
do
think
too.
that's true. One of the things that I loved about Love Bites was that it was like a travelogue of Los Angeles. You were in the Valley and Beverly Hills. Everything was very vivid.
Well, that's where I live, and that's what I know, the Sportsman's Lodge. And my favorite part was I got to include a very close friend of mine that your viewers will know if they know, if they know Lethal Weapon or Rockford Files or Escape from New York or Creepshow or The Fog, Tom Atkins.
Oh.
And I got to make Tommy a character in it because he is such a character in real life, and I love him so dearly. I called him up and I said, Tom, I'm writing you into this. Is that okay? Sure, 80.
That was
You know,
great.
so-
The other thing I thought, and I guess it's because I haven't read a lot of these books, but this shape-shifting thing all the way through was like fascinating to me.
The werewolves, yes.
Are they the only ones who
Yes.
do that?
Oh no, actually, it's been a while since I've read it. Let's see.
But I mean, is that a part of like vampire stories?
That is, well, yes,
shape-shifting?
vampires, that's a part of their mythology.
I see.
Yes,
That's what I
definitely.
wondered. And before we leave, I know you're working all the time. You're on a CSI recently, General Hospital.
I'm doing General Hospital and having a good time.
Well, we're so happy you were with us today. Thank
you.
And we'll be right back with the author Michael Michaud. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm here with author, photographer Michael Greg Michaud, who was born and raised in Maine. His photographs have been exhibited in group shows all over Los Angeles, and including the Laura Schlesinger Gallery, where he had a solo show in 2009. Michael's been writing books since 1988, published by the MGM Press, and he's edited, translated, and contributed to all types of literary works. I mean, it never stops with you, Michael. Let's talk about the Mae West Project. Tell me a little bit about that.
The photograph project?
Both parts of it, yeah, because it's very interesting. Those photos were at the Schlesinger Gallery.
Yes. Those are photographs of carnival dolls that were created in the 1930s and 40s of Mae West. They were made out of plaster.
Oh, how great.
And this was before stuffed animals. And they were toys that were won at carnival games or circuses. And those companies that produced them were actually located in Venice, California. The molds were made here. They were designed by two different designers, and they were produced over about a 25-year period of time. They would produce 100 to 200 at a time, and each one was hand-painted.
They were chalk, right?
They were, well, chalk or plaster.
Or
some of them
plaster?
were solid, some of them were hollow.
Oh.
Each one was hand-painted, and even though there were only a certain number of molds, there were many different types of decoration on them, because every day when the people came to work to paint, they were given certain colors to work with that day, and those were the only colors that they were using. So you would see the same mold over and over again, but decorated in a different fashion.
And
So
how did they get Mae West?
Well, Mae West, the actual figure of Mae West, the classic hourglass figure, was very easily produced in that form.
Oh,
They
I
also
see.
did Charlie Chaplin, W.C. Fields, the Marx Brothers, very classic, and Shirley Temple.
Is that right?
So
And
I've
so you would
collected.
go, they're your own?
They are my own. I've collected them for years. You can find them on eBay now, but they were in antique stores all over the place.
And was a factory in Venice?
The factory was in Venice, California. They produced there for almost, I think, a total of 40 years.
Oh my gosh. So that show was in 2008, and you had a
Yes.
book that went with it?
Yes, there was a book that went with it. I did portraits of each one of those dolls.
Oh.
So it was a fun show, very, very, very fun. And even for young people who don't really remember Mae West, the figure is so iconic. It was very interesting and fun for them.
Well, you have a terrific career because writing and photography go so hand in hand, and you can control what you're doing, I think. You probably, it sounds like that's what you like to
Right.
do. How many pieces were in the photo show?
Well, I have almost 50 individual dolls.
Oh, so they...
And I photographed each one. I think the show, we probably had 20 or 24.
What was the format? What size?
The photographs were 8.5 by 11 up to 16 by 20. The
Okay.
actual dolls are from 12 inches tall to 14 inches tall.
Oh, so they're great. And then what about the book? Was there copy in the book, or was it just
There was
photo?
a little essay about the Venice factory where they were made, and there was a photograph of the actual dolls when they had first been brought out of the kiln. And the molds were opened, and they were all waiting to be painted.
And you could find that at the factory?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's more fascinating than I thought it was, because
Well, it's local.
it was. And I remember a friend of mine's father owned a factory like that. They used to produce things for the Venice Boardwalk, I guess it was. Was it, or Carnival, or?
Well, POP was here at that
Oh,
time,
that's
the
right.
big park on the coast. There was also a factory in Seattle, and they did several different Mae West dolls. There's a couple of books, very interesting reference books, that have photographs and the history of all those different molds and companies. But most of them were on the West Coast.
That's funny, because when I was talking to our mutual friend Marcia Harrow, I said, well, how did he take pictures of Mae West? Did he actually go to her apartment on Rossmore? And she said, I don't remember. I don't think so. So they were the dolls.
They were the dolls.
They're great. And as a videographer, you did some work for Shambhala.
Yeah, Shambhala Preserve.
Right.
I did. I worked on a short film for them with Steve Whitmire, who was Kermit the Frog for the Henson Company, and Tippy. It was a short film, I think probably 18 minutes.
So we've built this kind of background of historic or iconic people that you've talked about, or that you've known, or you've been interested in. How did you get to the young Sal Mineo to write a book about?
I was a fan of Sal since I was a kid.
So let's talk about Sal Mineo, the biography.
I was a fan, and when I moved to California, I was very excited because he was about to star in a play at the Westwood Playhouse called P.S. Your Cat is Dead.
Oh, yes.
He had appeared in it in San Francisco very successfully. The play was moving here. Milt Katselas was directing. And I didn't have very much money at the time. I scraped my pennies together and I bought a ticket to see the play. I was so thrilled to be able to see him in person. And I had read the book that the play was based upon earlier.
P.S. Your Cat is Dead.
P.S. Your Cat is Dead. James Kirkwood wrote it. And several days after I bought a ticket, he was murdered.
Is that right? That's how it happened?
It was just several days, and I was shocked. I was very disappointed. I went to see the play. Interestingly, the actor that he replaced in San Francisco took his part when he was killed here.
So you didn't have a chance to meet him?
No.
See him on stage?
No, I did not.
But it was just this desire to know
Well, I
him.
was very interested in him. The story was, the end of his life was so shocking to me. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't believe it. And I thought about it through the years, and there's very little written about him. And I found this to be really a confusing situation, because this fellow was a two-time Oscar nominee, an Emmy nominee, a Golden Globe winner, a Gold Record winner.
On Broadway.
On Broadway, in The King and I and The Rose Tattoo, all before the age of 21.
I know, it's fantastic.
An amazing career, and there was nothing written about him. I couldn't understand it. So I began to do a little research. That started about 10 years ago. I had no idea.
I was going to ask, how long did it take?
Yeah,
at least 10 years, right?
At least 10 years. I had no idea what I was getting into. But the more I found out, the more interesting he became. And then I began to track down the people who knew him and loved him and lived with him. And none of them had ever talked to the press before. They were very guarded about their relationship with him for reasons that I came to learn after writing the book. And
what reasons?
Well, they were very concerned about the way he would be depicted. His life,
like in the underworld, well, they didn't want that.
Yeah, he didn't have really a dangerous or underworld life, but there was this perception in the press. There was a misperception of his death, that it was a murder that had to do with his sexuality or some kind of strange thing, which wasn't at all the case. And they were very concerned about the way that he would be portrayed in the book, which I certainly can understand. And his male lover and his female lover are alive and well, and I was writing about their life as well. So they were very protective, and they wanted to make sure that everyone would be represented fairly, especially Sal.
So you gained their trust.
I did.
As along the way while you were researching. One of the things that I found so interesting is, and it's so beautifully written.
Thank you.
I just think it's fantastic. As you're talking, you're quoting his words.
Right.
There must have been those quotes in interviews that
Well,
you found.
he had an interesting career. His mother managed his career.
I saw that.
They never hired a publicist because she felt that she could do a better job. So from his earliest age, when he was working, he very freely gave interviews. So I spent 3 years researching in libraries interviews that he gave and collected over 1,200. It took me 3 years to do that. I put them in chronological order. And then when I started interviewing people, I was able to reference these things back and forth. So he's very present in the book. He's very alive in the book.
I know, he's talking in the book. That's why I was so interested in the fact that, did you know him? Did these people tell you this is what he said? But you actually took that from pieces of your research.
Oh, yes.
And then did you write chronologically?
I did.
So that everything kind of fit into...
I found it easier that way.
And one thing you mentioned to me earlier was that Courtney Burr had given you a lot of photographs.
Courtney did, and so did Jill Howarth.
Oh, Jill did too.
The actress who lived with him in California.
Oh, yes. so that supplemented what you were doing?
Yes, I had a lot of photographs on my own, and I purchased a lot of things. Oh, you did? But I had wonderful photos that people had never seen before that came from Courtney and from Jill, professional photos as well as personal photos.
When you started writing, was there anything like really unexpected or startling that you found?
I wasn't aware of all of his accomplishments. I didn't realize how hard he worked, and even though to the public he sort of disappeared in the 60s, he really didn't. He continued working. He was doing one-off television shows and dinner theaters and things, but he always worked. I was also very interested in the fact that someone who can achieve such greatness can lose it and still maintain their sense of self, a healthy sense of self, never lose their pride, never lose their interest in their work, and just keep swinging. And he ended up sleeping on friends' couches for a time. And this was a man who bought his family a $500,000 home.
I know.
But he never gave up. He had a very good attitude all the time, a very hard worker. He was interested in finding material that challenged him and interested him. And even in today's world that is so technological and filled with wizardry, the story of this man's life is so real and relevant, just as relevant today as it was 50 years ago. There's nothing that's outdated about a person coming to terms with who they are, their sexuality, where they play, where they fit in life, how to make their professional life work for them and be satisfied. These are age-old stories that are as relevant today as they were then.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
And yes, you can go away, but you have to keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, Los Angeles 90017, JAQUINN1 at AOL.com. See you next time.